Have you ever wondered how it all began? I'm not talking about life or the universe, but something much closer to home. How the first humans went from being just another animal to becoming the rulers of the planet. The answer lies in a moment that changed everything forever, a moment so simple that it seems almost ridiculous. It all started with a rock that broke accidentally. Millions of years ago, in the vast plains of Africa, a hominid was walking across rocky terrain. Maybe they were looking for food, perhaps fleeing from a predator, or simply exploring their territory. At some point, they stumbled and fell. When they hit the ground, a basalt rock struck another one and broke apart. What happened next changed the course of human history forever. That broken stone wasn't just another accident. It was humanity's first tool, a piece of basalt with a sharp edge that could cut, scrape, and accomplish things that bare hands could never achieve. Our ancestor picked up that rock, examined it, and in that moment a spark ignited that would take us from the African savanna to modern cities. This is the story of how a simple accident turned into humanity's most important revolution. It's the story of how a broken stone taught us to be human. To understand the significance of that moment, we must imagine life before tools. Our ancestors were essentially primates that were slightly more intelligent than others. They had skilled hands and curious brains, but were limited by what their bodies could do naturally. Did you want meat? You had to hunt with your bare hands, or wait for other predators to leave scraps. Wanted to break a bone to get to the nutritious marrow? You had to use your teeth and hope they didn't break. Wanted to scrape a hide for clothing? Practically impossible without tools. The world was an incredibly harsh place for these early humans. They had to compete with lions, hyenas, and other predators that were much better equipped for survival. Their claws weren't sharp enough, their teeth weren't long enough, and their physical strength wasn't the best in the animal kingdom. But they had something that other animals didn't, the ability to see possibilities where others only saw obstacles. When that first stone broke and created a sharp edge, our ancestor didn't see it as debris. They saw it as an opportunity. It was as if nature had given them a clue, a hidden gift that only someone with the right intelligence could recognize. That moment of realization that, hey, this could be useful, was the first step towards modern humanity. Life before tools was pure survival. After the advent of tools, it became something more. It turned into creation, innovation, and progress. Our ancestors transformed from being victims of their environment to becoming its architects. If this story fascinates you as much as it does me, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you won't miss more amazing content about our origins. When our ancestor lifted that first broken stone, they had no idea they were holding the future of humanity, but instinctively, they knew there was something special about that sharp edge. It was like discovering liquid fire. Dangerous, powerful, and full of possibilities. The initial experiments must have been fascinating to observe. Imagine the scene, a hominid taking that sharp stone and testing it against different materials. Maybe first against a stick and bam, it sliced cleanly. Then against the bark of a tree and it came off easily. Next against the hide of a dead animal and it split open like butter. Each new use was like discovering a superpower. Suddenly, human hands had become knives, saws, and scrapers. It was as if nature had updated human software with new features. The first uses were basic but revolutionary. Cutting meat became much easier, which meant they could make better use of the carcasses they found. Scraping hides allowed them to make warmer, more comfortable clothing. Breaking bones gave them access to marrow, an incredibly rich source of energy. But here's the interesting part. They didn't settle for just using the stone they found. They began to observe how it had broken, studying the fracture pattern and trying to recreate the process. It was like reverse engineering, but millions of years ago. The first attempts must have been disastrous. Stones that broke poorly, strikes that missed the mark, frustration from the inability to replicate the miracle. But they kept trying because they had seen the possibilities. They had tasted the power of tools, and there was no turning back. This learning process was crucial. They weren't just learning to make tools. They were developing something even more important, the ability to learn intentionally. They were practicing, improving, and sharing knowledge. They were becoming human. Once our ancestors grasped the basic principle of making tools, a technological revolution was unleashed that spanned millions of years. But it wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow, meticulous process filled with incredible innovations. The first advancements were improvements on the original stone. They learned to select better materials. Some stones broke better than others, some held their edge longer, and some were easier to handle. Basalt, obsidian, and flint became the go-to materials. They also developed more sophisticated techniques for breaking stones. Instead of just hitting one stone against another, they learned to use specific angles, to control the force of the blow, and to predict how the stone would break. It was like learning to sculpt, but with a practical purpose. Tools became more specialized. It was no longer just a sharp stone, but specific tools for specific tasks. Knives for cutting meat, scrapers for cleaning hides, points for making spears, and hammers for breaking bones. It was as if they had opened the first hardware store in history. The manufacturing process also grew more complex. Some tools required multiple steps, first preparing the base stone, then making the primary cuts, refining the edges, and finally polishing the surfaces. It was assembly line manufacturing, but millions of years ago. The most impressive part is that they started making tools to create tools. Special hammers for breaking stones, anvils to support the material, and even tools to sharpen other tools. It was as if they had understood that technology builds upon more technology. They also developed systems for storage and transportation. Some tools were too valuable to be left behind, so they began to carry them with them. This meant they had to think strategically about what tools to bring and which ones to leave behind. Can you realize how incredible our ancestors were? If you want to keep uncovering more about these fascinating stories, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss any content. But making tools was not just a technical issue. It was a deeply social process that changed how humans related to one another and to the world. Tools not only transformed our hands, but they also transformed our minds and societies. The knowledge of how to make tools became the first educational curriculum of humanity. Adults had to teach the young not just which tools to use, but how to make them. It was like a primitive university where the degree literally meant the difference between life and death. This teaching process developed language in ways we could not have imagined. They had to explain complex concepts. Hit here, not there. Use this force, no more. Wait until the stone is at the right angle. Language evolved to convey increasingly sophisticated technical knowledge. Tools also created the first divisions of labor. Some individuals became specialists in making tools, while others specialized in using them. It was as if they invented guilds and professions thousands of years before cities existed. Trade also began with tools. Groups that had access to good stones traded them with groups that had other useful items. Tools have been found made from materials that came from hundreds of miles away. It was as if they created the first trade routes in the world. Tools also changed the social structure. Individuals who could make the best tools became more valuable to the group. It was like they invented meritocracy. Your social value depended on your technical skill, but perhaps most importantly, tools changed how humans viewed the world. They were no longer just inhabitants of nature, but became its modifiers. They could change materials, create new objects, and solve problems that once seemed impossible. Can you imagine how it felt for the first human who managed to make a tool better than their parents? Do you think they realized they were changing the world forever? Tools didn't just change what humans could do, they literally changed who humans were. The process of making and using tools began to shape our bodies, our brains, and our capabilities in ways that scientists are still studying today. First, human hands evolved to be perfect for manipulating tools. Thumbs became longer and stronger, fingers developed greater precision, and palms adapted to grip objects of various shapes and sizes. It was as if tools had redesigned human hands to be more useful, but the most dramatic changes occurred in the brain. The process of making tools required planning, memory, hand-eye coordination, and abstract thinking. All these skills exercised the brain in ways it had never been exercised before. It was as if tools were the gym for the human brain. The human brain began to grow, not just in size, but in complexity. New connections developed between different regions of the brain, especially between areas that control movement and those that process visual information. It was like they installed new neural hardware. Toolmaking also developed mental visualization skills. Humans had to imagine how a tool would look before making it, plan the steps in the process, and solve abstract problems. It was as if they invented technical imagination. The use of tools also radically changed the human diet. With tools to cut and process food, humans could access nutrients that were previously impossible to obtain. Bone marrow, for example, is rich in fats that nourish the brain. It was as if tools unlocked the fuel for brain growth. But perhaps the most important change was in the way of thinking. Humans developed what scientists call operational thinking, the ability to see objects not only for what they are but for what they can become. A rock was no longer just a rock, but a potential tool. Do you realize that tools didn't just make us more powerful, but also made us more human? If this story is blowing your mind, share this video with your friends so they can uncover these incredible secrets too. Millions of years after that first broken stone, tools had completely transformed the human experience. What began as an accident had become the foundation of all civilization. But to truly understand the importance of this moment, we have to see how those first tools evolved into everything that surrounds us today. Stone tools were perfected over millions of years. Archaeologists have found tools so skillfully crafted that they resemble works of art. Arrowheads so symmetrical that they could compete with any modern design. Knives so sharp that they can still cut after being buried for thousands of years. But the real leap came when humans learned to use tools to control fire. Fire was not just heat and light, it was a tool for making other tools. They could harden wooden points, melt materials, and create implements that were impossible to make with stone alone. The control of fire led to cooking food, revolutionizing human nutrition. Cooked foods are easier to digest and provide more energy, which fueled even greater brain growth. It was as if they had discovered a turbo boost for human evolution. Advanced tools also enabled the construction of more sophisticated shelters. They no longer had to live solely in natural caves. They could modify their environment to make it more comfortable and secure. It was like they had invented primitive architecture. With better tools, hunting became more efficient. They could hunt larger animals, providing more food for larger groups. This allowed human populations to grow and expand into new territories. It was as though tools had unlocked the global expansion of humanity. Agriculture, thousands of years later, was only possible because humans already had sophisticated tools: hoes for tilling the soil, sickles for harvesting, and containers for storing grains. Without tools, agriculture would have been impossible. Have you ever considered that everything you use today, from your smartphone to your car, is a direct descendant of that first broken stone? Do you realize that every tool you touch carries within it millions of years of human evolution? And so, my friends, a simple stone that was accidentally broken became one of the most important moments in human history. It wasn't a planned invention, nor was it the result of years of research. It was pure happenstance transformed into brilliance by human intelligence. That first tool taught us that humans are unique, not for our physical strength, but for our ability to see possibilities where others only see obstacles. We are unique because we can take an accident and turn it into progress. From that first broken stone to the smartphones we carry in our pockets, all the tools we use today are part of an unbroken line of innovation that began millions of years ago. Every time you use a knife, a hammer, or any tool, you are directly connected to that first human who picked up a broken stone and envisioned the future. The history of tools is the history of humanity itself. It is the story of how we learned not only to adapt to the world, but to shape it to suit our needs. It is the story of how we turned our limitations into opportunities and our weaknesses into strengths. But perhaps the most important lesson from this story is that human progress does not always come from grand plans or solitary geniuses. Often it comes from accidents, from coincidences, and from our human capacity to recognize opportunities when we see them. The next time you use a tool, any tool, remember that you are participating in a tradition that spans millions of years. You are continuing a story that began with a broken stone and an ancestor clever enough to see in it the future of humanity. That first tool not only changed what we could do, but also changed who we are. It made us human. And that is the true magic of a jagged rock that became the foundation for the future of the world.